This is another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show where we discuss real issues with great people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. While trying to be so shrewd when dealing with the case against R. Kelly, government prosecutors managed to mislead the honorable court of law, causing the district federal judges both in New York and Chicago to make very serious blunders with their legal interpretations. In Chicago, to be specific, Judge Leinenweber got carried away and completely forgot to consider the statutes of limitations when addressing the sexual exploitation and inducement charges that had been afforded within the super-indictment. In Jennifer Bonjean's appeal submission, she made sure to clarify on these charges as non-applicable, and cited the non-retroactivity of the U.S. law to show how careless the government had been to add such charges to the indictment in the first place. In her reply brief, the experienced appellate attorney again emphasizes these charges were never supposed to appear on R. Kelly's charge sheet, and she is right. And this time she has made reference to various previously handled cases where the non-retroactivity of the law was assumed and the statutes of limitations respected. The government's argument in this respect is that the relevant statutes of limitations which would otherwise bar the addition of these charges to R. Kelly's indictment had been extended to allow more time for the plaintiff to file a case against the R&B King. What they forget, however, is that the U.S. law just doesn't work that way. Any changes or updates to the law made today with accordance to the non-retroactivity clause simply do not affect matters that took place and that could have been prosecuted years back. The statutes of limitations that were in action back then therefore do apply even now that they have been extended to allow more time. The principle of non-retroactive application of law generally prohibits the application of a law to events that took place before the law was introduced. Similarly, it prohibits the application of new amendments to matters that occurred before the amendments were made. And such is the case against R. Kelly, where charges affected by the statute of limitations back in the years are being returned to court only because an amendment was made to increase the time of expiry. In fact, the application of this principle of law, which is in accordance to international standards, has remained controversial in certain cases where new laws to take climate change have been enacted with the hope to crack down on investors whose corporations have been detrimental to the environment, but because of this principle of law, these investors have been successful in challenging these new regulations before the international courts and tribunals. The principle of non-retroactivity is in fact an international standard in matters of criminal law. The Chicago federal judge Leinenweber therefore cannot pretend not to have known that these sexual exploitation and inducement charges were never applicable and shouldn't have been allowed on the super-indictment. And now that they were mistakenly added and presented in court, there was no way a guilty verdict could have been issued by the team of jurors under the supervision of a qualified and experienced judge like him. To further emphasize her argument still in her reply, Attorney Jennifer Bonjean made it a point to list a few examples of cases where the statutes of limitations were respected and upheld by the very same court even if extensions had been made. In one example, Bonjean speaks on the case of Gibson versus the United States of America. Gibson's case, which was a lot more complicated than this particular one against R. Kelly, still saw defendant return to freedom citing the non-retroactive principle of the law. Gibson, whose alleged crimes were carried out in 1996, had initially been indicted in 2001, a move which fell well within the 5 years of statute of limitations expiry. He, however, preferred to make a run for it, leaving the jurisdiction, and the expiry period was told while he was away. In January 2002, with a deal, Gibson pled guilty of a few counts, getting himself a 262 months imprisonment sentence, and the rest of the indictment was dismissed on the terms of plea bargain. Defendant Gibson proceeded to appeal the guilty conviction, which was duly reversed, but this was done along with the part where the plea agreement was defective, meaning the plaintiff now had the freedom to reinstate the part of the counts of the indictment that had been dismissed pursuant to the plea agreement. Defendant Gibson, however, argued that 3 of the reinstated counts were time-barred, something which the government argued was not the case because the statutes of limitations had been extended. This same court, which is now handling the case against R. Kelly, however, found that the application that sought to extend the statute of limitations did not in any way violate the defendant's ex post facto rights. Ex post facto is a Latin word to mean from down afterwards. The ex post facto principle of law therefore entails that whatever laws or amendments to existing laws that are made today will only affect actions that occur today and afterwards, and therefore after the enactment. The Chicago judge's decision to issue guilty verdicts on matters that were time-barred is therefore highly questionable, especially now that we know of several other cases from the past that were even more complicated than this, where this very same court of the United States of America threw out counts that were ex post facto. By making the judgments Lion Weber and his jury made, the U.S. Department of Justice is trying to tell us that had it been the same Chicago federal judge handling the Gibson case, the verdicts would have been different. This also translates into believing that the U.S. laws can change from time to time depending on who is seated in the judge's chair and holding the gavel. Oh, what a shame. Another way to look at it is that we probably have two different constitutions for Gibson and R. Kelly in the same country. Well, maybe we do. With Bonjean's new argument and explanations documented in her reply to the Chicago Court of Appeals, we expect nothing less than a win when it comes to dislodging some of these rather concocted charges. There is no way R. Kelly should have been convicted as guilty for sexual exploitations if he had been subjected to a fair trial, where the law is placed at the forefront and not personal sentiments and the desire for racial discrimination. We cannot be having two different judgments on two similar matters where a simple reference to what the Supreme Law says would have provided the perfect remedy. According to Quina Jones. Hello HN. Thanks for keeping us updated on what's happening with the case against R. Kelly. Besides the courts ignoring the statutes of limitations and the non-retroactivity principle of the law, it's obvious that many of these women were likely forced to take the stand and testify. The government broke the law not just once but multiple times, and they expect us to believe everything they put out against him. They probably thought R. Kelly was too poor to afford the services of a good attorney, considering they had muted him with the help of their Sony bosses. Thank God Jennifer Bonjean stepped in to help. R. Kelly must win his appeal, and we cannot wait to see him return to us. Thoughts and prayers are with you and your team at HN News. According to Mary Redman. I wish to appreciate the appeal court judges in advance, for I know they are not going to allow the lies that were told on R. Kelly to prevail. These two trial judges shouldn't get away with all the mistakes they made declaring R. Kelly guilty when clearly he isn't. It's in fact still hard to understand how they expected to violate the Supreme Law and get away with it. By declaring R. Kelly guilty on counts that were time-barred, they exposed their prejudicial character and willingness to abuse the laws of this nation to achieve their selfish interests. If the Department of Justice had delivered half what is expected of them, R. Kelly would not be in prison today. He would be out here making music and enjoying his freedom as the American citizen he is. Sony dropping him before a verdict was also a breach of contract and could cost them a great deal if he decided to pursue a settlement. We hope to see you soon as a free man, R. Kelly. If you wish to take part in a live interview on this channel discussing any of these topics, let us know by emailing us on sashahnnewsroom@gmail.com for scheduling. That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say? To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.